Dr. Naomi Wolf is a best-selling author, a columnist, a professor. She's a graduate of Yale University and received a doctorate from Oxford. She's co-founder and CEO of Daily Clout. That's a successful civic tech company. Since the publication of her landmark international bestseller, The Beauty Myth, which the New York Times called one of the most important books of the 20th century, Dr. Wolf's other 7 bestsellers have been translated worldwide. The End of America and Give Me Liberty, a handbook for American revolutionaries, predicted the current crisis in an authoritarianism and presented effective tools for citizens to promote civic engagement, which is what Daily Clout does. She trains thought leaders of tomorrow, teaching public presentation to Rhodes Scholars. She was a Rhodes Scholar herself and was an advisor to the Clinton re-election campaign and to Vice President Al Gore. She's written for every major news outlet in the U.S. and many globally. She had 4 opinion columns, including in The Guardian and the Sunday Times of London. Welcome, Dr. Naomi Wolf, to the Economic War Room.
Thanks so much for having me back.
Well, you know, it was great. I saw Rhodes Scholar. I was nominated by the University of Tulsa and a state finalist, but I didn't make it to Oxford. You not only did that, but you went back for a doctorate, which is amazing. And you've got a new book out, The Pfizer Papers, with the foreword written by recently released from prison, Steve Bannon. The book isn't opinion, it's analysis. Describe the difference between opinion and analysis and the process that you undertook with your team to make this happen.
Sure. Well, this is an historic week in which to discuss this book's publication. Yesterday, I was actually at Mr. Bannon's press conference in Midtown Manhattan, where he addressed a room full of hostile legacy media, or mostly hostile legacy media, after having been incarcerated for 4 months, persuasively, arguably, as a political prisoner. And he is the godfather of this project. He wrote the introduction, as you mentioned, or the foreword, and it's his imprint. So the genesis is that I was deplatformed by the White House in June of 2021, when I warned on Twitter that women were experiencing menstrual symptoms upon receiving the mRNA COVID injections. And I was smeared and canceled, and the only people who would talk to me, Steve Bannon reached out to me, and I brought my evidence about this and other issues related to it to his audience. In 2022, there began to be a release of internal Pfizer documents due to a successful lawsuit by attorney Aaron Siri of ICANN. And the FDA had asked the court to keep these documents hidden for 75 years. And Bannon and I were both concerned, even though they were being released, that no one would know what was in them because they were so voluminous and so technical. So he prompted me on camera to issue a call to experts to read through them and create reports. And I did. And under the leadership of this extraordinary woman, Amy Kelly, the project director, 6 teams of now 3,250 doctors and scientists did volunteer. And for the last 2 years, they've read through these 450,000 documents and have issued these reports. 50 of them are now in this book that you just held up. And this documents and breaks open the greatest crime against humanity in recorded history, I'm sorry to say. And I can go into detail about that if you like, but you asked what's the difference between opinion and analysis of the facts. Yeah. So this book isn't opinion. It would be easy to dismiss if it were. It isn't my opinion, certainly. I didn't do the work. I just edited the reports. This book is 50 reports by the most credentialed doctors and scientists from many, many fields who link to Pfizer's actual internal documents. Journalistically, there's nothing better than a primary source, let alone one the company and the FDA wanted to conceal for 75 years. And these are scientific papers. One of them was published in a peer-reviewed journal that explain without opinion, literally just explain what's in the documents. And so you'll see that Pfizer hid the bodies of 8 dead people infected with COVID when they died, vaccinated dead people, so that they could falsely claim that getting vaccinated made you less likely to end up hospitalized or dead. They knew that 1,223 people died in the 3 months after the rollout. They knew that there are over 130,000 adverse events, 62% of those in women, Of those, 16% in Pfizer's words are, quote, reproductive disorders. They knew that the vaccine didn't work to stop COVID. They knew that a month after rollout, the third most common side effect in the papers is COVID. And the centerpiece of all of the horrific tens of thousands of strokes, neurological events, blood clots, lung clots, leg clots, heart damage, pericarditis, myocarditis, pardon me, eye damage, kidney damage, liver damage. Of all of this, the centerpiece of the documents is reproductive damage, which Pfizer studied and studied and studied and studied, which is weird because COVID is a respiratory disease, right? But the heart of the papers is how to ruin human reproductive capacity.
Well, let me get this straight. So what happened essentially is you started noticing these effects having in women, and you brought it to the attention of the world just casually, and they deplatformed you. You know, you really are a former media darling. Everybody seemed to love your work at one point, and then all of a sudden you just spoke up against this one thing you couldn't touch, and you're deplatformed. And then somebody yells, and pardon this, but hey Siri, in terms of Aaron Siri, hey Siri, what's the truth? He sues, he gets information out. They don't want to let it out for 75 years, and then finally when it gets released, it is bundled so tightly that it would be impossible for a human to get through. You look at this and you just throw up your hands and say, you know, I trust them, you know, they're Pfizer, they're the government, they know what they're doing. But when you dug into it, you found not only were your original concerns justified, but there's a whole host of other things that were hidden in those documents. Now, I don't want to be against Pfizer. I don't want to be against the FDA. I don't want to be against the government. But facts are facts, and that's what your book does. It describes facts. I heard there were 3,250 strangers pulled together by Daily Clout, you and Amy Kelly. I'm guessing none of you are on the Pfizer Christmas card list.
No, indeed. For the record, none of us is suicidal. Yes. Right. No, just kidding. No, I mean, what could be more compelling than the fact that people around the world with no affiliation, no conflicts of interest, highly trained in their respective fields, all found the same conclusions and brought them to the world and linked to the original documents. And by the way, you know, we've been doing this for 2 years. No lawyer's letter from Pfizer. The book has been out, climbing the bestseller list for 2 weeks. Pfizer has said nothing to contradict us or to stop us. Well, they can't. It's true.
Yeah, the truth is a solid defense. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, let's talk a little bit about your journey and what we should be doing about it. In uncertain times, finding stability in the economy can feel challenging. But what if you could navigate economic volatility while honoring your biblical values? At Timothy Plan, they believe this balance is possible. Timothy Plan filters its volatility-weighted ETFs and family of mutual funds through a biblical pro-life and pro-family lens, so you can see competitive returns and moral responsibility, helping you to weather the economic storms. With Timothy Plan, align your investments with your values while adapting to our ever-changing culture. Since 1994, Timothy Plan has been recognized leader in biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, your bridge between faith, finances, and the future. Visit timothyplan.com or call 1-800-TIM-PLAN or 1-800-846-7526. Investing includes risk, including possible loss of principal. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com.
Washington said paper money opens the door to every species of fraud and injustice. Jefferson said paper is poverty. Hamilton said to emit an unfunded paper as the sign of value ought not to continue a formal part of the Constitution. The founders hated paper money, so they put a pirate money clause in the Constitution for our state to use. Learn more at transactionalgold.com.
We're talking with Dr. Naomi Wolf, and we're talking about the Pfizer Papers. It's an incredible project. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. Steve Bannon, I think, called it a crowdsourcing research project, which is I don't know of anything like this that's ever taken place. And she and Amy Kelly pulled together the most incredible. I mean, it's a super thick book, climbing the bestseller list. I mean, but look how thick this is, and you know, it's not large print. It's just a big book. Tell me a little bit about your journey with Steve Bannon, because, I mean, you guys would have been, 20 years ago on opposite sides of the political spectrum, but you came together to do something amazing.
I mean, it's one of the most extraordinary stories, all of it, right? Like, to organize 3,250 people into 6 teams with a committee at the head of each, working in different time zones around the clock for no money to bring the truth to the world and save millions of lives. It's a movie, right? And I don't know how Amy Kelly did it if it weren't a little bit for the hand of divine providence, because it's like it's impossible to imagine otherwise, and the fact that not 20 years ago, but 4 years ago, I thought that Steve Bannon was one of the worst people on the planet, because that's how I'd been propagandized. And to this day, we don't agree on a lot of policy issues. I'm still a classical liberal. He's still an arch conservative. But it really didn't matter when it came to profound threats. And I said this on the air to him last night. When it came to profound threats to women and babies, it wasn't the feminists on my side, the feminist health advocates, who gave me a platform. It wasn't, liberal legacy media that gave me a platform. It wasn't all the right-on people who are supposed to care about women's health, who had loved my work for 40 years, by the way, No, it was this arch conservative who was the only person who offered me a platform to bring my concerns to his audience, and who then was the godfather of this extraordinary undertaking. I mean, even yesterday, this book was behind him while he faced a hostile audience of my former friends, 30 to 40 representatives of the legacy media. And it is an extraordinary story. We still don't agree on a lot of things, but he cares about the Constitution and he cares about human life. And beyond any of this, he's a journalist. And this is the biggest story, if not, certainly of the 21st century, right? And I keep going on his show and saying, Washington Post, I'll give you our records. New York Times, I'll give you our records. This is the biggest story that your readers could ever hope to read. It affects them and their loved ones profoundly. And literally, Steve Bannon was the first major news outlet to act like a news outlet in terms of this story and pay attention to it and facilitate it. So it's an amazing, I can't believe it happened to this day. I'm how can I put it? I have no evidence that his unbelievably harsh prison term for a misdemeanor has anything to do with the threat he posed to Pfizer, as well as this administration, who are deeply implicated in the crimes that this book annotates, right? This book is not just a compendium of what happened to you. It's also an analysis of a crime scene, a massive crime scene. But I can't believe it helped. And by the way, we've been really effective. Pfizer's net revenue is down, or gross revenue is down to 2016 levels. And the people who took the booster are in single digits, according to the CDC. So maybe even less than that. We dealt them a crippling blow, and we saved, again, thousands of lives and maybe millions of babies.
Well, I want to point out, I read this book, I don't know if you've read it, The Great Influenza by John M. Barry, which is an incredible book. It's about the Spanish flu. The conclusion of the book, I think you will find illuminating. This was a New York Times bestseller. It's an amazing book. I read it. Here's the final lesson of 1918 in the Spanish flu. A simple one, yet one most difficult to execute, is that those who occupy positions of authority must lessen the panic that can alienate all within a society. Society cannot function if it is every man for himself. By definition, civilization cannot survive that. Those in authority must retain the public's trust. The way to do that is to distort nothing, to put the best face on nothing, to try and manipulate no one. Lincoln said that first and best, a leader must make whatever horror exists concrete, only then will people be able to break it apart. I think this book and this book, this is 105, 6 years ago. This is just a couple of years ago. But the facts are the facts. The pandemic was mishandled in 1918. It was mishandled even worse recently. One thing I want to ask you about, though, you used the term classical liberal, which is an amazing term and one that I particularly admire. Can you describe what a classical liberal is and how that's different from what most people think a liberal is?
Sure. Makes me sad to even have this conversation. That, I'm such a dinosaur now, being a classical liberal, that people don't even understand what the term means, which is true. I mean, people like you do, but the average person, doesn't, including people all around me who have great educations. So classical liberal, the tradition descends from 19th century European liberalism, which was in contrast to monarchism. And a classical liberal believed in representational government, a parliament, rather than, fiat by an aristocracy. A classical liberal believes that all citizens of a state are equal, as opposed to the situation before 1848, for instance, in Europe, where a lot of Jews, for instance, were considered less than equal or didn't have full civil rights. A classical liberal believes in free markets, with good social organizations reforming or mitigating the harshest effects of free markets. Classical liberal, above all, believes in freedom of speech and, in our case, a constitution, but in countries around the world, their version of Declaration of Human Rights or Charter of Rights in Canada, and believes in the individual and in human dignity, as opposed to what, believe it or not, students are being taught as the basis of political orientation now at Princeton, which is quote unquote harm reduction, which is a straight up Marxist Chinese communist idea of what the state is for. And classical liberals believe that the role of the state is to protect the rights and freedoms of the individual.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing distinction. It's how classical liberals and traditional conservatives can come together in much the same way that we're seeing Marxists and fascists come together on the other side, which you would never have expected. And the difference is the belief in individual liberty and the support of the basic Bill of Rights that were granted to us by our founders.
That's right. This is a really useful minute and a half. I hope a lot of students clip it and keep it in their phones for reference. This is what the world has divided into, is people on the right and left who believe in freedom, or people who've walked away from the left who believe in freedom, working together, as you see with RFK Jr. and Trump, and people, fascists and Marxists on this other side, working together. That's where we're at right now.
Yeah, it is. Well, we need to take a break. When we come back, let's talk about solutions. What can we do to make America better?
Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government, and freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It has to be fought for and defended by each generation.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
In this most critical time in our nation's history, now more than ever, Americans need to align with companies that support our constitutional rights and God-given freedoms. Patriot Mobile supports your values and provides exceptional 100% U.S.-based customer service. Join the movement today. Go to patriotmobile.com or call 972-PATRIOT.
We're speaking with Dr. Naomi Wolf. She's got a new book out, The Pfizer Papers, that she pulled together with Amy Kelly and 3,250 researchers that didn't even know each other. It's an amazing book. And when you look through it, you see all of the issues: women's issues, heart issues, clotting, cancers, organ damage, adverse events, deaths, long-term impacts. All of this from a vaccine that was forced on children who weren't even likely at risk. And she's got Dr. Peter McCullough mentioned in there, who's, a good friend of the Economic War Room. We had him in episode 292. It's amazing how the establishment not only rejected, but attempted to punish anyone who spoke up against something as simple as a vaccine. So we've got her, and the implications of this are health implications, but there are also other societal implications. Can we censor facts? Can we censor scientific inquiry? It seems like they did that. What are the dangers of us not standing up, not pushing back? Naomi, what are your thoughts?
Well, first I want to say that I had the privilege of writing about censorship in my doctoral thesis, and so I looked at censorship in Britain and America for the last 200 years, and actually going back to Milton. And what's clear is that censorship doesn't work. I mean, I wish something that the censors would process and understand is that they can censor all they want, but over time, there is no such thing as censorship, because over time, the truth always comes out. And you look at the history of what's been censored, you couldn't mention homosexuality in Britain for, since 1857 till the end of the Obscene Publications Act. And that didn't do away with homosexuality. You couldn't mention birth control, and that didn't do away with people wanting to finding out and seeking to use birth control. There are so many topics that have been censored over time, it doesn't make them go away. And so that's number one, but it doesn't stop tyrants. Tyrants will tyrant, right? And I think the scariest thing of the last few years is the way we've seen two attorneys general's lawsuits against the Biden administration revealed that it was the people I voted for who put pressure on Twitter and Facebook to censor people like me, people like Dr. Bhattacharya of Stanford, Dr. Koldorf of Harvard, no doubt people like you, right? But it doesn't matter what the credentials are of the people who are censored. That's an illegal violation of our First Amendment rights. The government is not supposed to be stripping citizens of their First Amendment rights. So I guess that's what I would say about your question about censorship generally. But I think that the last few years have been an awakening. I think that people have become very complacent, had become complacent since World War II in Western Europe and North America, Canada, Australia, and they thought their rights would be there forever. And they were willing to chip away at them or let them be chipped away at, right? Oh, a little bit, who likes hate speech? Let's crack down on hate speech, right? Let's I don't like Trump. Let's make sure that he's kicked off of X. I don't like those bad people. I'm going to make sure they can't speak at universities. Well, the chickens have come home to roost. My grandmother's generation protested for the right of Nazis to protest in Skokie, Illinois, even though they were the victims of Nazism, because they understood that there's no such thing as free speech for me and not for thee, right? You have to protect speech you hate if you're going to have free speech at all. And I think people are also becoming aware that without free speech, without the First Amendment, nothing else is possible.
Well, and when you shine the light on the darkness, you let the truth out, it actually kills off a lot of bad things by itself. People themselves say, I don't want to have anything to do with that. Allowing them to march in Skokie was part of the culture that's allowed us to recognize that Nazism is bad. So I agree with you entirely. And if you stifle scientific inquiry, then you have no science. I mean, Albert Einstein says, never stop asking questions. We have to question everything, because what we thought was true science 100 years ago or 400 years ago turned out to maybe not be all that true. So we have to continue to allow scientific inquiry. And as I read your book, I know your doctorate is not a medical doctorate. I call you Dr. Wolf, but it's not but I think you earned one just looking at all the science. And, frankly, I think you probably know more than most who just go along with the narrative, because the doctor that goes along with the narrative is not taking care of my health. And I need somebody who's willing to ask the right questions and willing to challenge the narrative. That's how they figured out about ulcers. Ulcers are bacterial in many cases and can be solved with an antibiotic. But 100 years ago or 40 years ago, they thought they were all from eating too much spicy foods. So we need scientific inquiry, absolutely.
Yeah, that used to be called science.
Exactly. So what?
Scientific inquiry.
What can we do to make America better? How do we do that? We've got a couple of minutes left. What would be your prescription, Dr. Wolf, for a better America?
Well, I can't stress enough that I agree with your point about sunlight making the best disinfectant, right? That the more we know, the wiser we are, the wiser choices we can make. That's true with this book. People's doctors can't tell them the truth. So this book will show you and tell you what your doctor can't say. They're still bound contractually not to deviate from the CDC's line. Professional organizations took the money and have to give it back if doctors give their patients real informed consent. So I do think this book is going to help people support their health in spite of this horrible injection. Generally, America, I mean, you know, our founders were so brilliant. They created a few perfect documents, right? They weren't perfect. Our nation's history isn't perfect, but they created documents as perfect as human documents can be. And all we need to do is read them, understand them, protect them, and defend them. If we had done that throughout the last 4 years, we wouldn't have had the mandates. We wouldn't have had the bad science. We wouldn't have had the coercion and the totalitarianism and the claims by my governor at that time that I couldn't have more than 6 people in my house, right? The Bill of Rights and the Constitution says that that's nonsense. So we need to know our rights and stand up and defend them. And only thus will we remain America and not become Canada or Britain and Australia that have collapsed so badly in terms of freedoms.
Well, you know, I agree with you. This is kind of a book I would put on every household shelf because it's got the things you can talk to your doctor about when you see symptoms or whatever. Whether you took the vaccine or not, it's a very helpful document. Where can people get copies of the Pfizer Papers, and where can people best follow your work?
Thank you. Really great to go to Amazon to order your copies. That helps us push it up the bestseller list. And you can follow us on dailyclout.io. And also you can follow me on Substack on Outspoken.
All right, we're going to summarize all this in our free economic battle plan. You can get a copy at economicwarroom.com. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.